Welcome to this explainer. Okay, think back to the last major high-stakes exam you took. Your educational or maybe even your professional future might have depended on that score. Have you ever wondered where those test questions actually come from? I mean, they don't just magically appear on the page, and they for sure aren't just jotted down by a single teacher the night before the exam. No. Before any single question, or item as test developers call it, ever reaches your desk, it has to survive a rigorous, honestly almost brutal trial. Today we're going to demystify that trial. We are going to explore the absolutely crucial quality assurance process known as test moderation. So let's dive right in. Here's our agenda for today. First, what is test moderation? Second, the goals of moderation. Third, phase 1, which is content review. Fourth, phase 2, covering statistical piloting. And finally, item banking and consensus. Section 1, what exactly is test moderation? To really understand how tests become professionally accountable and reliable, we first need to define the exact engine that makes it happen. By definition, item moderation is the quality assurance process where draft test items are systematically reviewed, revised, and approved by a panel of experts before they're ever included in an operational test. This is a massive shift in how a test is built. You see, an item always starts as an individual writer's draft. But let's be real, individual judgment is inherently flawed. Moderation is the institutional mechanism where that single author's judgment is put under intense collegial scrutiny. A panel of qualified experts systematically reviews, tweaks, or just outright rejects the draft before it can ever see the light of day on a live test. It's basically how an individual's draft transforms into a highly professional, accountable product. Researchers Davidson and Lynch actually hit the nail on the head back in 2002 when they characterized moderation as the social dimension of item writing. What they mean is that it's a highly collaborative and dialogic process. This isn't just a solitary editor quietly fixing commas at a desk. It's a professional community engaging in serious dialogue, negotiation, and debate over what actually makes a good test question. Moving on to Section 2, the goals of moderation. So what strict standards is this expert jury actually using? Well, the panel has to verify 4 main pillars for every single item. First up is content validity. They're checking if the item measures exactly what the test blueprint says it should, without needing any irrelevant outside knowledge. Second is linguistic accuracy. The item has to be grammatically flawless and pitched at the exact right reading level for the audience. Third, fairness and absence of bias. This is huge. Reviewers actively hunt for cultural bias, stereotyping, or any weird difficulty spikes that might unfairly disadvantage a specific gender, ethnicity, or socioeconomic group. And fourth, consequential validity. They have to anticipate the washback. Basically, if a test relies completely on narrow, hyper-specific questions, it forces teachers to shrink their curriculum to match. The panel evaluates what real-world impact the item will have on actual classrooms. Getting an item right means verifying it across all these different dimensions at once. We're talking about checking the big picture distribution of topics across the whole test, all the way down to the precise linguistic appropriateness of a single word in a prompt. It's a seriously demanding checklist. All right, Section 3, Phase 1, the content review. Long before anyone sits down with a number 2 pencil to take the test, a moderation panel gets together for this pre-operational stage. And think about who is in this room. You've got senior test developers, subject matter specialists, representatives for the target learners, and often explicit fairness reviewers from communities who might be impacted by the test. They take a draft item, hold it up against that strict checklist we just talked about, and they literally argue its fate. Ultimately, the panel has 3 choices. They accept the item as written, they revise it through panel consensus, or they toss it out completely. Let's actually look at a detailed example of this in action so you can see exactly how test moderation fixes problems. Imagine a draft item designed to test advanced reading comprehension about quantum physics. But the original item writer accidentally uses slang, like saying a scientist spills the tea on a new theory, right in the question stem. Now, a knowledgeable test taker might understand the physics perfectly but get completely lost by the slang in the question. This introduces what measurement experts call construct irrelevant variance, which is just a fancy way of saying it's an irrelevant difficulty. During moderation, the panel's linguistic review catches this exact inconsistency of register. They collaborate right there to revise the item, swapping out the colloquial terms for appropriate academic vocabulary that actually matches the intended audience. This ensures the item accurately tests reading ability and not just familiarity with current slang. Next up, Section 4, Phase 2, Statistical Piloting. Now, human judgment, even highly expert human judgment, has its limits. Once an item survives that initial human review, it then has to survive the cold, hard scrutiny of empirical data. This means taking those panel-approved items and actually administering them to a representative pilot sample. Basically, a small group of test takers drawn from the exact population the final test is meant for. We absolutely need to see how the item behaves in the wild before we count it for a real score. This generates our empirical data, which is known as item analysis. Think about a distractor analysis for a multiple-choice item. The moderation panel tracks the exact proportion of test takers selecting each option. Say 75% chose the correct key, option B, while the incorrect distractors, A, C, and D, pulled in much smaller percentages. That looks pretty good. But if an item showed weird anomalous statistics, like, say, a wrong answer was suddenly pulling in all the high-ability test takers, or the correct answer had a negative discrimination index, that is a massive red flag. It points to a hidden flaw, maybe an ambiguity that the human panel totally missed. A second moderation panel then steps in to examine these flagged items using the empirical data and decides whether to keep, tweak, or trash them.
And statistics are absolutely crucial for ensuring fairness. Which brings us to a concept called differential item functioning, or DIF for short. DIF is a statistical framework that identifies items that function differently for different subgroups, like specific genders or nationalities, even when those test takers are at the exact same overall proficiency level. So, if a reading passage about a super-specific regional sport accidentally heavily advantages one cultural group, DIF statistics will flag it immediately. This helps the second moderation panel catch hidden cultural biases that the human reviewers just didn't recognize, forcing that item back into revision or rejection.
Finally, Section 5, Item Banking and Consensus. After surviving this intense trial, both the human debate and the statistical stress testing, the successful test item finally reaches its destination. Items that pass both moderation and pilot review are deposited into an item bank. And this isn't just some basic computer folder. It's a meticulously organized repository. Items are tagged by the exact construct they measure, the specific skill, the difficulty level, the topic, and all their statistical properties. This lets test constructors easily build new test forms that meet predetermined specs. On top of that, these banked items are carefully tracked for public overexposure, because if an item appears too often in public circulation, a student's performance might just reflect test familiarity rather than their actual ability. When that happens, the item gets retired.
But building that item bank isn't the end of the story. Effective management requires constant, ongoing quality monitoring. An item that performed wonderfully with one group of test takers might behave completely differently with a new cohort 5 years later. Or an item considered totally culturally neutral a decade ago might actually be biased now as social contexts change. Moderation is an ongoing, living construction of assessment norms.
Which brings us to a pretty powerful realization to end on. Tests are never neutral. They embody theoretical assumptions, they distribute opportunities, and they can either reproduce or challenge inequality. As you walk away from this explainer, remember that assessment always requires critical awareness. We've just seen the incredible institutional machinery it takes to make a single fair test item. So ask yourself, how have the high-stakes tests you've taken impacted your own educational journey? Did they serve your learning or merely enforce a standard? Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive into the fascinating trial of test moderation.